Thank you everyone for joining us for this next edition of the NADSFL Cafe. We know that your time is very valuable and we appreciate it that you're spending it with us. This is our second meeting and today's topic was a burning topic, I will say, from the survey. You had great interest in learning more about grading for proficiency, stemming from the discussion from last time from talking with Alyssa. So we're excited to have Lilley with us today. She is a National Board Certified Teacher and the 2010 ACTFL National Teacher of the Year. She is the Middle Years Program Coordinator for the International Baccalaureate Program in Springfield, Missouri Public Schools. She previously taught Spanish for 20 years at the middle and high school levels, as well as a methods course at a local university. Lisa has served on the boards of the Foreign Language Association of Missouri and the Central States Conference on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. She currently serves on the ACTFL board as treasurer and is a member of its executive committee. And if you haven't yet met Lisa, she is a delightful person. We are so glad to have her here today. So Lisa, we're going to turn it over to you for your thoughts and comments.
Well, thank you, Christy and Leslie. I'm very excited for this opportunity and the very nice invitation that you've offered to me. I was remembering back, I joined NADSFL, attended the first meeting in San Antonio in 2007. And I remember walking into the room of all these really esteemed and wonderful teachers and leaders and feeling very out of place. But listening to last month's NADSFL Cafe, I like how you ended it, Christy, by talking about the snowball, how we grab a little bit of snow in our hands and we make a start and we keep rolling it around and things become stronger and stronger till we have more of an impact. And I think that's what the journey is for me, certainly, in working to become more of a leader and advocate for our profession and increasing my teaching experience and certainly in the area of standards-based grading, it is a burning issue. Definitely the flames are all around it. I thought I might talk about though how I first came into teaching and then my own progression as a teacher with it. So I graduated with a Spanish degree, but I did not ever plan to become a teacher. But at some point along the way I thought I always enjoyed it, and I went back to work on a master's, and because of the shortage that often is in our world language teaching field, I was called in to start teaching with a provisional certificate after I only had maybe 3 classes at the graduate level. And so that first group of 8th graders, I taught them some Spanish, but they certainly taught me a heck of a lot more than on the other side of the thing. But over the second year, I was able to move to a high school and get in with what I really would call, a team in every sense of the word. We were a group that supported one another. We learned, we grew. We had 2 really strong ladies who were the leaders, who gave some of the newbies more of a chance to grow, and they did a lot of the heavy lifting for us so that we could perfect our craft as we went along. And one of the things that really helped me in my early days was the FL Teach listserv, and it's still in existence. Many of you may still take part in it, and it's been, it was kind of the thing that we had back in the day, but today things like Ling Chat, so many wonderful blogs and things also help to serve us to inform our instruction. But that was really the place that got me questioning about my own grading. And if I look back on my progression, I can think how my gradebook was always changing, how I set the categories, and I went from one where homework had such a high percentage of importance to where it got down to as low as 10%. In my very last year of teaching, and I hadn't really looked formally at standards-based grading other than I could sense, just organically that it was the right way to go, that I made more of my summatives became more important. I put more value on what students were doing within the class and very little on what was being graded, for value outside of the classroom. So in a sense, I was gravitating that way, but still not quite there. So 4 years ago, I did make a career shift. I was recruited pretty heavily to take on the position working with International Baccalaureate as the Middle Years Program Coordinator. And I don't know if any of you out there listening have experience with it, but it does work with not what is standards-based grading. The IB calls it criterion referenced scoring. And the idea on that is that it's not true we're not teaching mastery learning. We're not going to slow down and wait till everyone has mastered a concept before we move on, but we're going to take multiple measures over time to check a student's progress. So they may not do so well in a particular criterion at the beginning, but we're going to make multiple measures over the course of the year. We don't average grades. We don't have the zero because what we're really trying to do is to show knowledge. And so I came into the position, had to really learn a lot, educate myself very, very quickly, on just the whole nature of how it works. I will say quite honestly, it is still a work in progress that as we try to get everybody's understanding of really what the value and purpose of homework is. If we look at how we're trying to break away from grading for compliance, and that used to be my participation points, and I used to pass out fiches as a way to monitor how many kids were participating in class, and that was just a really nightmare for me as far as keeping track of all of that. And today, we look at those are formative experiences. Those are trying to get kids to move to the point where they can perform at a later date. When we look at perhaps a performance assessment, different ways of trying to show their knowledge. So it's been a long process. My job now is working with teachers, not just world language teachers, but I'm working with teachers in all subject areas. And that's been very enlightening. I think it still shows my bias that I have, that world language teachers are very much the movers and the shakers in a school. They're the people to embrace new methodologies, technology, because all we're really trying to do is just boost engagement for our students. And by doing so, we have a far better chance at boosting their proficiency and getting them to see that languages are a place they can be successful at, that have real value. But just working with teachers at different levels, we try not to use the word buy-in, we try to use the word support, but people with different levels of support for standards-based grading, for the movement from devaluing the formative assessments and putting more value on the summatives. It's a long haul. And I think in conversations with my administrator, he says if he had to do it again, he would have just started from the beginning, just insisting upon standards-based grading. We've been very slow in the process of getting teachers to move that way, to our criterion reference, I should say. We've taken baby steps, and from my perspective, I think probably that was the right way. But it's been a slow process, and I think sometimes we wonder if we couldn't have sped it up. And I think probably the biggest takeaway that I've got from it is, and maybe our people out there listening can identify, I think what we really have to do is not only be knowledgeable about this area, how it impacts language learning, how we assess for performance, but we have to be leaders of change. We have to really understand how you guide and manage people through such a big process when there's different levels of support for it, when they do feel like you're moving their cheese, when you are taking people out of their comfort zone. That's quite a step forward. And I think in hindsight, I wish I'd had a little bit more understanding of just what it is to be a change leader, and to make the journey maybe a little bit more softer for a lot of our people. So
change is hard.
Right. So those are kind of just some initial thoughts of kind of my journey, to this point.
All right. So thank you so much for sharing those, initial thoughts with us. What would you like to do, Lisa? Do you want to jump maybe right to the document and try to go through some of the questions, or you have more you want to share with us?
Well, yeah, I thought I would just come up for air there and see if there was anything that was a particular question that you had. But I do have some thoughts on, what has worked for us. And I think that has been going along the lines of just really educating myself on standards-based grading, the different ways, and IB works in a different way, but become up to date with the criterion reference scoring that they work with. And I noticed on the document a lot of people had listed some good resources, some places that might be helpful for us. And I think as we go through our discussion today, that might be a really good thing for our audience to add some ideas. Because I do think you've got to be not a complete expert. We're always learning, and this is a complex subject area. But I do think that was something that has worked. I mentioned earlier taking baby steps, and it may be that people are working in schools where the overall setup is never going to go to the school-wide, that it
Right.
only would be
Implementation.
departmental. But what can you do within your classroom, and each one of us can really look at that idea of homework and its value and what type of homework that we're giving, and moving away from valuing points over performance, and the message
Yeah.
that we send to our students. Those are things I think that are very much the teachers do control.
And so, Lisa, as district supervisors and working with teachers, we ourselves have to be knowledgeable before we can in turn share that knowledge and ask teachers to do anything differently. So you were talking about baby steps, and I noticed they did list, a couple of you, thank you, have listed some resources on the page. But for you, if you were starting just what is proficiency-based grading, where would you start? I mean, what are your maybe first couple baby steps?
Mm-hmm. I typically just do a Google search, and I'm guilty of looking up a few hits, that come up, but that's usually just my starting ground. But I do the Ken O'Connor materials people have put up. The repair kit for grading was the first one that I came across. Is just a good, general look at what's going on in grading and why might we want to make a change. So a good general place for information to get started. I had also, somebody put up about Toni Tyson sharing a lot of concrete examples, performance-based. I did put a link to her wiki space, which I think you're going to find lots of rubrics and things that teachers have, not only she's worked with in her district, but some other teachers that she's shared. Those are good, helpful places. And then not listed on our rubric yet, but at ACTFL in San Diego, Nicole Naditz gave a really good toy talk on standards-based grading, which is about a 16, 17-minute talk that gives you some good places there, just really the arguments for or against, traditional versus standards-based grading. So I think that could be a good beginning place just to kind of get in it, or to help in the role of supervisors. How do you counter some of those arguments that people put forward as to why we can't change to something different?
Right.
So I think there's just, I don't, Ed Week has had some good articles and things. So there's a multitude of resources out there that people can inform themselves with that general view. Where I said I think it's important to inform ourselves, but again, there's just so much knowledge out there. We can't be 100%, of course, on anything. We keep working and trying to learn as we go.
Which is why we're here.
Right.
We're hoping to glean our collective knowledge and pull it all together and put it in one place as a resource. So it's really great to have this opportunity. I know for me, just to ask you in kind of a hot seat format in a little bit, just what specifically for my particular situation. But it's also great to have that broad view of, okay, here's the overall aspect of proficiency-based grading, but then when it drills down into my district, what does that mean for me? So kind of talking through that with somebody else is really helpful. And so I also encourage you, if you do not have a mentor, if you are new to your district supervisor position, please reach out to somebody. Reach out to somebody in NADSFL. Get connected with our president, Leslie Baldwin. She can put you in connection with others that are willing to be mentors. You just got to have somebody else you can call and say, hey, is this a stupid idea? Or is this on track? Or, that kind of thing. So I encourage that as well. Oh, some people are putting up some really good resources. Thank you, thank you.
Great.
All right. Lisa, do you want to maybe take a quick look at some of the questions online?
Sure.
Can you see that document?
Is it over there under questions where people are?
I did. I put the link. Well, I put the link in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Let me go to the chat box. Sure.
Oh no, you actually can't.
Well, I'm trying to find that. I'm not sure if I'm in the right place, but can you just throw some at me, and I'll try to do my best to kind of work through.
Sure, no problem. One of the questions here is, what research supports changing to a proficiency-based grading plan? And we kind of talked through that. You gave us some places we could go to look for more information, which I'm sure those things that people have provided, maybe perhaps the books might present maybe more research perhaps than some of just the websites with some of the resources. But somebody asked, is just in general question, is proficiency-based grading the same as standards-based grading?
I think they are close. I think when we look at proficiency, we're really looking at the idea of, where our students are tracking on the different proficiency levels. So, in my world, I'm working with teachers at all different subject areas, but in addition to world languages. But I think in the world, of course, in our world, we're wanting to check the children on where they're, or our learners on where they're at as far as moving forward in proficiency. So I think if you're in a world where you can keep that focus on just on the proficiency levels themselves and work out your scoring according to that way, we're going to be able to show the greatest gains for our students. And I always come back to the idea that when the students can feel that they're making progress, what an incredible motivator it is.
Sure.
One other thing I might talk about is as far as research, we looked in our district at the Hattie book, and Sean Hattie, Hattie. I don't remember that name offhand, but we looked at all the different research, and he looked at the things that had the most effect on student learning. And students taking control of their own learning had the #1 effect, but the role of feedback was really, really high. And that plays right into the hand of why when we look at performance-based grading and assessments and standards-based, it really is that role of feedback is what's going to help the students know what to do to take control of their learning to move forward. And I think more than anything and teachers struggle with that. How do we find time? How do we give the right type of feedback? And I encourage my teachers at this point, just, we hear it all the time, put away the pen and just talk. Try to get a chance, try to work in chances to counsel your students, to give that in real-time feedback, whatever it might be. It might just be something very small, might be something, very targeted to a function, but it's not you spending hours at home, sitting with all these papers in front of you, but, that in-time feedback has such a big impact on students. And I think that was one of the things that, that's a good starting point with people really supporting the movement towards proficiency-based assessment, is the idea, that importance of feedback. And everybody has seen it. Everybody has seen a student who has benefited from whatever type of feedback it might be to move forward. And I think that sometimes if we find that common ground, instead of making this an argument about different systems and different approaches, if we go to the common ground of what we can support, that can have a really good inroad in us making some relationships and getting that support from teachers.
Lisa, I just emailed you the link to the document.
Okay, I'll take a look.
Leslie, was that you? I couldn't tell if she was trying to talk. It was very soft.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, there's the link to that document. So
I've got it. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So just kind of while you're pulling it up, one of the questions that people have asked is, do you only grade performance-based tasks?
We do in our system, yes, because everything else is formative. That's a big movement, that's a big jump. And you'll often hear people talk about, well, that's not real world. I don't want a doctor who's had to retake tests or didn't do his homework or this or that. But I was just at Central State's conference over the weekend in Columbus, Ohio, and the very last session, the last time period on Saturday was one from the Adlai Stevenson High School in Chicago, and it was on standards-based grading, and they drew a really nice crowd, for that very last time slot, and so many questions people had, but they kept coming back to the point that, real world is having multiple chances to try, to have lots of formatives, to have those chances that don't count against you. We can't grade, we're going to Super Bowl, we don't grade them on the practices that they did prior to the Super Bowl. We know that those are all important to getting them up there, but ultimately that day's score is based upon that performance at that point in time. And that's, this idea of getting against that real world. People hit you up with that all the time, that, oh, this is, again, that idea, I don't want a pilot, who has not done his homework, who has had to retake tests and such. The real world is we get multiple chances to get better.
or negotiate meaning, or
Mm-hmm,
whatever the
mm-hmm,
case.
mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm trying to help some people online who need the doc. Kimberly, I just sent that to you. Trying to get through, and thank you for, oh, look at all of the resources. This is so exciting.
Yeah, very great. Uh-huh.
So hopefully those of you listening know that this is not only a time for us to kind of talk together and share, but a place for us to go and reference in the future as we, oh, I think we talked about that one time in NADSFL Cafe, and you can pull these back up. They are in the members only portion of the NADSFL website. So, all right. I'm trying
One
to,
thing I had noticed, people were talking about, how do we
mm,
report this, report cards and such, and
yeah.
in our district we've had to work to create our own report card. We don't call it a grade card anymore. We call it a report card because we're looking at, again, the progress and performance. And I've had to become a really good friend of the IT
Oh,
person
yeah.
who is helping me out with that. But, there may be places where you can't, again, it's not going to be system-wide. So teachers may be looking at, in addition to what they're having to report, as an A, B, C, D grade, that they also provide a proficiency-based report card, that's really showing what's going on in the classroom so the student can understand that. And I always come back to that, one student gets an 89%, another student gets a 91%, 89% on our scale was a B plus, 91% was an A minus. What was the real difference? And could it be that I wrote some poor test questions, that accounted for that difference? And so when we look at proficiency-based, we're really trying to show the students the targets and what they need to do to get better. And going back to Hattie, when they can see what they need to be doing, that's the greatest effect upon the student learning, is when they take control and know that, realize that, gosh, for this next time I've got to get better at this, this, and this, or these are my targets that I need to work on. That's a really strong thing, to help students move forward. And so different ways to go about reporting it. I think building that relationship with administration to have conversations, multiple conversations with them about how valuable this is as a way of showing progress. And, I would think about, I can remember about 8 years ago when this first started floating in our district about the idea of standards-based grading and how out there that idea seemed. And today it just almost seems like you're behind, if you're not really there or making steps to get there, because the conversation has changed substantially.
Right.
And that's an exciting thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just could you talk a little bit, there's a couple of questions on here about just the grade book itself, that, you have to plug something into somewhere. So how does that, are you able as a district, at the district level, able to have some influence on that?
Well, again, in ours, being an IB World School, we have 4 criteria that the teachers are assessing. But I have seen teachers in other places that set it up against, in the modes. They'll have an interpretive mode, they'll have a presentational mode, they'll have an interpersonal mode, and that's what they're assessing the students on. And I think that could be a very interesting way. And I can remember somebody years ago talking about how students might be stronger in one area than another, and that just kind of blew my mind. How would I even go about trying to show that? But I think that we can. It's how we set up our grade book, and we really do some reflection on how that might be. And I think some of those, I know that Tony had shared, Tony Tyson, on her wiki space. I think that there will be some good, somebody wrote in there concrete examples, and I do agree with that. I think you'll find some ideas of how other people have set up grade books to show that. So I think it, again, it goes back to the idea of what do we value, and our points, what it's all really about. And I would say definitely not. We know in language proficiency that it's a steady journey. It's a long journey in many cases. We're trying to speed it up for our kids all the time to make higher gains faster than what we used to in classes by knowing a whole lot more about how people learn languages. But we need to show that gradebook's going to measure what is really valued, and that is what can they perform, what can they do, using the can-do statements.
Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about showing and explaining, thinking about the question about the stakeholders and how do I get them on board, so where do you recommend at the district level, where do you start? Do you start with your teachers? Do you start parent outreach, or what have you found to be a good way to get everybody involved and understanding what you're trying to do?
Mm-hmm. I've learned a lot. I share an office with the literacy coach in our school, and her as a coach, she just says you always start where you have those little pockets. You start where you have people who are interested, and I think that that's been a really good piece of advice. That you can really change a culture from within by getting some people who have an open mindset, who are curious, and get them feeling success, and then they can slowly start to branch out and share with other people. That idea of just saying this is what we're going to do becomes quite threatening and can slow things down, substantially. So I really have, tried to follow her advice. Just kind of work in places where you've got people, and that becomes infectious, and that can be one idea, I think, of how to approach it. I think there again, your support from administration, and hopefully you'll have good people who are open and willing to share. But even in places where maybe they're just not, it's a bridge too far or whatever, there are things that individual teachers can be doing, and it is that sense of what am I going to, within my 4 classroom walls, what am I going to really value? And it's going to integrated performance assessments where kids can be, we're trying to give them as close to a real world task as we possibly can, and letting them see that, gosh, I really could handle this or that situation. I really was able to communicate with native speakers and make myself understood. And any places like that, that's what we can control, regardless of what the grading system ultimately is imposed upon. I think if we still have to convert to A, B, C, D grades, which I hate. I really wish we could just have our system of measuring proficiency against our rubrics and reporting that, and not have to convert. But we're still in this old world of having to do A, B, C, D, and so we still, kids and parents are, that's what they go by, and we're having to just keep plugging away at. But look at the rubrics, look at the measures here of proficiency, and that's what's really important for you to get even better in the future.
Have you seen more student engagement with this type of grading? What's been the effect on the student?
I love it. I know many of our listeners have probably heard that when kids say, this is a test, when you to do some type of a performance assessment, and they're doing a real world scenario, some type of a simulation of something, and they've got all the knowledge to be successful at it, and they're used to tests not being a place where they feel successful. They're used to tests being full of gotchas, and when we can work with, we've got so much going now in our profession. The IPAs are such a wonderful addition to being able to marry that idea of the can-do statements to real-world situations. And when students can feel that success, it keeps them in the game, and that's how I think we can keep our enrollments up. I think we've clearly seen that in our French programs, that our numbers are really growing because the teachers have embraced, a strong foundation of, having the kids show what they can do. The other thing that we found is that, one of the early worries was how are parents going to take this, we're in a Title I school, so unfortunately we don't always get as much parent engagement as we would really like. We always welcome whatever we get with open arms, but and then about 30% of our students transfer in for the International Baccalaureate. They come from all over the district and all types of families and households and situations. But what we really found in the early years, we spent a lot of time, working with parents, trying to inform them about what this grading was going to look like. It's going to be very different than what they have ever seen before themselves. But now the great thing is the kids are the experts. They can explain it. They understand it. And they're seeing the consistency, from subject to subject area. So it's not just what the one teacher is doing in their classroom. They understand it as a whole. But to never discount the value of your students, bringing them in so that they can understand it and explain why this is a good system. This is student friendly. It's trying to show what they can do as opposed to a system that's going to punish them and haunt them with that low grade that they made early in the semester, that's going to continue to affect their grades. We don't average. We're looking at measurements over time, and are we seeing a good positive trend forward for the students?
Which goes back to that ownership, you know, in that sense of motivation that you were referring to earlier. It's just good to see that played out. I remember at one of the sessions with Greta, she was talking about arming yourself with research, and some, you know, for the questions about how do we get those stakeholders involved. I think that's part of the answer is like you were saying earlier, studying and learning about, not that we have to be an expert, but we have to be prepared with an answer about why this is a better for students. Not better for us, not even honestly better for teachers, but why it's better for the students. So I wonder too, can you see the document now, Lisa?
Yes, I had it up all along. I thought when you were saying questions, I thought you meant something else. I'm sorry.
Okay. No. We do have a follow-up question from the question bank, and you know, just she says in high school, grades, whether number or letter, are very important. What's a given? I would argue at many grade levels. It's just a matter of who they're important to. How do you recommend reconciling the proficiency level or score, I guess, with a grade? That's from Miriam.
Yeah. I think that may go back to the sense of a teacher may need to, well, let me go back even further. I think it starts often I think this is what Alyssa talked about, you know, in their district, and we did this too this year, that the students start off with a good 1 week of what is proficiency and how do I move from level to level, and for students to really understand that, because for too long it's just been teachers, you know, that if they even do know about the levels of proficiency, you know, we're getting better and better at that, but a lot of teachers, it's still something brand new for them. But, you know, in the cases where they do have that awareness, it's not enough for the teacher to be the only one who understands that. The kids really do too. And so once they start the year off with just the roadmap, they set targets for where they want to go and timetables for that. And so right there, you're off to a successful start, you know, and if you target every type of activity, every lesson, that, you know, what we're trying to do with this lesson or with this activity is to try to move forward. We're working on this particular skill, which we know is going to move us from novice mid to novice high, or we're trying to really target intermediate low. So if we work on this particular target, that's what we're trying to do to push ourselves forward. And the students understand that, you know, and they know that now that we've used that analogy before, that coaches are excellent at this. Coaches will always tell athletes why they're doing what and why it's going to help them in the greater scheme of things. And, you know, they're always building their skills to go forward. And if we look at retention rate in coaching, pretty high, you know, they've got a lot that they can teach us. And I think us being able to communicate that idea of the students, where are they at on the map, on the roadway to proficiency, and they understand that, then that helps us to move quite a bit further. So I think maybe in reporting it then is, it may be a teacher would, you know, be working with rubrics that consistently show that to their students, and maybe even design a simple report card of their own, you know, if they're in a place where they don't have such an animal within the district, that they could, again, be sharing that and helping students understand where they're at, and again, what they need to be doing as the next step so that they don't plateau. And we don't just keep people at one level. We keep pushing. And then they understand that it takes more time as we try to move from intermediate. It's going to take us longer and longer to make that progress. But, you know, we still are. Look at us. You know, we're on these targets. We're moving forward. And that's where I think a large piece of the understanding about how language acquisition works has been missing. You know, people just don't understand, you know, what it takes to move ahead. And I think that's a critical piece for us.
I think you're right. I think just the misinformation, particularly I think on the parent side, I think is just a little bit alarming. I'm always answering phone calls, and I'm sure you guys out there in the audience are too, about, well, my kids had 2 years of high school Spanish, let's just say, and why can't they lead our tour in Spain?
Right, yeah. Well, we're going to go to Cancun, and we're going to be a translator for the week.
Yes. They'll save some expense, and their kids will do it. It'll be fine. So, yeah. All right. Kind of looking at the next, what do you recommend? Because, you know, at the district level, we take this information to our teachers, and then they in turn teach it to their students. So when you get pushback, be it from teachers, be it from parents, be it from students, what do you do when this happens?
I think it's maybe to have a talk about, traditional grading versus, standards-based, proficiency-based, in the sense that, it's student-friendly. And I think one of the places you can talk about is the zero. We've moved away from that. And years ago, I've used it sometimes in workshops I give, but the idea of a zero is like sending a kid to Siberia, except in people who were sent to Siberia at least had the hope that one day they would be released from it, whereas a zero in grading, they don't. It's going to haunt the students across the way, and that 60%, where we put an F at 60%, well, we've really structured more of the grading scale is weighted towards failure than it is towards success. And so we really start helping people uncover what are some of the drawbacks of our old traditional systems. And am I really grading knowledge when I give extra credit points, for kids not doing what they were supposed to have been doing in the first place, for bringing in boxes of Kleenex? Is that really helping boost their knowledge of things? And, so often I think it's that extra credit. What can you do to help junior build up his grade here at the very, very end? And I think it's having to, again, communicate the importance of the practice of those formatives, that the students are going to do fine when we get to the summatives, as long as they're doing the things along the way. And we've all had cases of students who didn't do any homework, and yet they could still perform. But in my old way of grading, I penalized those students, and they didn't do very well. And I've traveled with those kids before, and the A+++ student wouldn't open their mouth when we were abroad because they're afraid of making mistakes. And whereas my, kid who didn't always turn in the homework, but they were the ones out venturing out and trying to do things. And so what do we, what do we really value? And so it goes back to that sense. So I think it's to probably break it down and just spend some time. How do I take the threat out of this, and how do I try to show that it's student friendly? And I really do think that once you've armed yourself with some of the readings, you're going to have all kinds of arguments for this approach, and it's going to make it very difficult to defend why we stay with a number reference system. That's the one that really should be put on trial. Why? It doesn't make sense when you really get into it. Why do we insist on staying with numbers, other than, well, they're supposed to get us to college? But I don't know, I talked to a lot of college professors, and they can't judge our GPAs because they're so inflated and they can't tell. There's no consistency across the board as to where they're at. And so they're getting kids who aren't really well prepared for college as well. So it's a vicious, setup that we have. But I think probably in talking with parents, probably trying to just think of how each one of us could convey a message that's not threatening, to talk about why this is of benefit. Keep that message, you mentioned it earlier, keep it on benefit to students. That's what's going to win the day.
I remember, and I remember the conversation, but I can't remember who it was with, but they were saying, how many times you wish you had a retirement fund for every time you heard, oh, I had 3 years of such and such, and I can't remember a thing. This is the answer to that. So standards-based grading and grading for proficiency is the answer. Like, yes, ma'am, you're exactly right. It did work for you, and that's why we're trying a new way. So here we are. So we've got about 20 minutes left, and I would really love for our listeners out there, our participants, to be able to ask you a couple questions if you don't mind. So participants, if you are, I don't think I can unmute everybody, but if you'll raise your hand, there's a little hand where it says attendees. Can you find that? The background noise is just usually too bad if I unmute everybody, but if you've got a question for Lisa, you can either type it into the question bank or raise your hand and I'll unmute you so that you can ask her. Sometimes it's easier to talk it out loud than write it down. We'll give them a minute to kind of find that. Find that function. There is one question here that she asked Lisa, is the standards-based grading in your school a district-wide or school-wide initiative in Missouri? Or is it limited to a particular department? I think you said it was your school-wide, right?
School-wide, because we're an IB school. District-wide, it's a slow movement forward. There are some different schools. We have several choice programs, so we've got some things going on where it's in place there. But district-wide, we have a new superintendent in his second year, and this is definitely on his horizon. And so we're seeing lots of things, kind of show up that those of us in the know, we know that what he's putting in front of people is, paving the way towards this conversation. But as a district, no. And certainly throughout our state, it's very individual as far what districts are doing.
Mm-hmm. One comment in the chat box is that ACTFL has a great resource to teach parents about levels and expectations for language, and they're going to send us the link. So if anybody knows perhaps where that might be, that would be helpful if you can't find it. So, and you don't have to have a question, you can just have a comment. It may be that they can't find how to raise their hand. Let me try unmuting everyone. So everybody, are you ready? Let's see how this goes. I don't mind trying it. So let's see. Let's see. I said I could. All right. Let's try. While I'm doing this, Lisa, there is one question. Yeah, so if it says, I wonder if some work around growth mindset might help the stage with teachers for considering change of thinking about the purpose of assessment. What do you think about that? Okay, you've all been just about unmuted, so you're welcome to comment or question as you feel comfortable. It's just us, so you can ask away, comment away.
I was going to just make one point that in our district they've encouraged a lot of people in leadership positions to take on cognitive coaching, and I would recommend that if that's something that you've not had or things similar to that, where you're really trying to not give advice to people, but you're trying to counsel their own thinking to help them make their ways forward out of problems and such. And I found that to be just almost kind of scary how effective it can be in taking on some of those fierce conversations and just helping people paraphrase their thoughts and their thinking and try to move forward. So I think that anything that can help working with people and working through a growth mindset are really important things for us in our different roles.
Well, I remember a lunch conversation at Lille this summer with Michelle Ola, and she was telling me about this book, and literally we walked down to Barnes & Noble, and I bought The Growth Mindset, and it was just riveted all the way home, and ever since. So it's definitely worth a read and a good, I think you're right, a good resource to share with teachers. So thank you, Diane. I appreciate you sharing that.
You're welcome. Hear me?
Yes, we can. So now's your chance. What would you like to say? What would you like to learn more about? What would you like to comment on that you heard today?
This is Diane.
Hi, Diane.
I would just say that I do think it's a journey, and that any steps toward not putting things in the grade book that Lisa was mentioning, like extra credit, I mean, that's sometimes for teachers that can be a big first step, not to give extra credit. And just to have them look at and analyze where are they really putting the value when they just start adding points, because sometimes those points can get really distorted, and they themselves aren't always aware, if they don't use a weighting system, how many points they've put toward X, Y, or Z. So maybe it would be a good exercise to sit down and with them and have them each look at their points and just begin to move even that piece more toward the proficiency piece.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
They need a bridge to get there.
But that is big, just that no extra credit. What do we do with kids who haven't done this yet? Well, we're trying to move them along to, that summative is the place to show what you know, and if we muddy that with all these other things, that we're really not getting a clear target. We're not getting a clear understanding of what they can do.
All right, so here's another question from Jesse. Many teachers I work with are very dependent on textbooks. How do you tie proficiency-based grading to textbooks?
Well, a textbook is it's a wonderful resource, and I think that's how we need to look at it. It doesn't drive who and what we are. We should value our professional knowledge as teachers. The proficiency guidelines, the targets are what should be driving us, and no place does it say it's got to be this list of stem changing verbs, and no place does it say it's got to be this particular vocabulary. The door is open. So there are places, and I think this is one of the things I try to talk about a little bit more with teachers. There are still so many districts where teachers are mandated to use a textbook. So what are we going to do in those situations where that's the given? How do we work with that? And again, so if we look at that textbook as a resource, it's going to support proficiency. We can look through there and see what targets, how we can marry what's within a particular unit with proficiency guidelines and the different targets. It's just that since we have to do everything scripted out the way it is, I think that's the place where we lose track with that.
And I think there's so much fear, because we understand as teachers the list. We understand the do this, this is what we've always done, and so to move away from what we've always known to the realization that it's really messy. And we understand that now. Those of you that understand, proficiency, it's messy. It's not clean. It's not one clear path for everyone. We're not all holding hands and marching down the road at the same pace. So it is, differentiated. So can you address a little bit more, Lisa, how to work with those resistors? Because that's where I think as district supervisors, that's where we are. Those that get it and are on board, it's turning those, hold on, I can't think of any nice words. It's turning those, it's turning those little darlings, teachers that just refuse to be open-minded. Do we let them go? I mean, what's your advice?
This is my advice. I don't follow it enough, but it's an 80-20 rule, 80%, 20% rule that, this is the 20% of the people who tend to suck away our time. And when you've got the 80% that largely understand it and get it, those are the ones that we should be nurturing and helping and cultivating them along. And yet all our time is being, by golly, we're gonna convert this person over. And, in so many cases, it's, they are hard nuts to crack. That doesn't mean that it can't happen, but I think if I look at where my time and energy and talents need to go, it's in helping those along the way who do want to grow and learn and such, and hope that those others are close to making other career decisions. But
that's a whole other topic of conversation.
Yeah.
How do we push people out?
A whole other level of cognitive coaching, right, to get there.
Right.
Maybe make some other choices. But
you're talking about a bunch of, a lot of district supervisors were the type A, were the go-getters, were the, leaders of the pack. And so it is hard for us to let those go and just say, you know what, I've done X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C, and they're still not on board. It's okay. Can we give ourselves permission to let those go?
Yeah, sometimes yes. And on the other side, I think there's just, teachers don't always feel a lot of empowerment. They were,
that's true too.
Many are used to being rule followers that serve them very well throughout their career. They're used to things working a certain way. This type of classroom instruction is what, they had no problems with it. So it's a harder thing. And there is, you mentioned fear. There's that fear of putting yourself out there and trying something that has a good chance of being messy and looking like failure. So I think it's also trying to carefully coach and support teachers to feel like they can take some steps forward. And that idea of the baby steps, it may just be the right way to work with it. How can you break some things down into concrete steps that people feel like it's can-do statements for teachers, isn't it? What can they do to feel successful and inch their way forward? And it maybe goes back to the conversation of, what's not working in your class that you really want to see, or what's maybe not even in those negative terms. What do you want to see your students able to do? Okay, and then what are the things that kind of stand in the way of that happening? And a lot of that may fall into opening up a really nice door for a discussion on grading, and then how can we start to take some of those barriers that keep students from being able to show their progress and their movement forward in language learning? So it may be the two things. It may be not giving so much time to those who are just time sucks that are so difficult to work with, but then looking at some others who maybe those who could still be converted over, and conversion is not the right word, who can support it. Help nurture them in their understanding and helping them break down those fears that they have.
Do you find you make more inroads with individuals rather than, you
Yeah.
on a group of 25?
Yeah, and we have tried to get away from those big group sessions as much as we possibly can, because it's just a very hard place to, the tone can really be brought down by just 2 or 3 individuals. So better off to schedule small groups, partners working together, small trios, small groups of teachers, and working with them that way. And I think another thing too is to allow time, for them to process it. And I can remember clearly one meeting where, one individual was just very stone-faced throughout our whole meetings in a group of 4 people, and just very much sitting back there. And so in the moment, it's disturbing to me. It's hard. It's hard to move forward with that. But afterwards, following up the conversation, found out it was some other aspect totally really unrelated to that was clouding their judgment in that moment. We were able to move past it. So, I think it's not to make judgments ourselves as to how people are thinking, and just try to realize it is going to be a over time process to try to bring them along.
Mm-hmm. I think I heard somebody a second ago wanting to maybe make a comment or ask a question. Go ahead.
Leslie, this is Diane. I think these are difficult, sometimes, conversations to back into with teachers regarding grading. So I guess I try to think about where they are and ask them, what is it that you like about the way you grade right now? And then, intent, I guess. And then in small groups, they can then talk about what it is they like about their grading. And then the next question is, what would you like to improve about your grading? So you begin to open that door to the possibility that they may not have 100% of the right idea. And then I think that begins to open that conversation a little bit about, okay, if I could change one thing then about my grading, what might that be? So I do think it's a kind of an organic process in part, but they do kind of need a little bit of a little push from time to time to move forward. Otherwise, we could sit back and admire the problem forever and really never. That's a pretty famous saying of mine. Are we going to admire this problem all day, or are we going to do something else?
I like that.
I like it.
So those of you out there that have worked with teachers, what have you found to be successful practices or techniques when you're working with those teachers? What have you found that's made a change in your teacher?
My name's Catherine, and I just wanted to comment a little bit about some of the rubrics In our department, we have developed departmental rubrics that are based on the modes of communication. So we have rubrics that we use, and one of the biggest things that we did as a department when we first started implementing them was to sit together as a department and grade together and talk about what does it mean to be a 10 or a 9 or an 8, and sort of creating norms, a series of norms. Our grade books are also set up with 30% for each mode of communication, and then we have a 10% category in which that we call skill and structure, and that basically is everything else. A lot of other teachers have formative categories that count for 0%, percentage points, but they that's one way that they use to track homework without counting any of it, giving any of it points, just because that way, in response to parents who say, well, why is Johnny getting a D? Well, one of the reasons that Johnny is not doing so well in his summative assessments is that he isn't doing his homework and isn't handing it in, so he's not succeeding. So anyway, so back to what you were asking, we have a series of sessions in which we kind of grade together and say, well, what do you think this should be? What do you think this should be? And talk about why, to make sure that we're all on the same page.
I love that idea.
This is
Catherine.
Greta. Yeah, this is Greta, and I'd kind of like to add support to Catherine's response. Norming sessions before we grade with the rubric, and what we've also done that's been helpful is part of that is just defining then the criteria. So for this task, what was the target structure? What was the target grammar? And that just brings awareness to folks, and they're able then to really, those things turn into professional development. And then we can also go back and look at the task or the prompt, and sometimes the prompt is the problem, and all those things just turn into a really gentle professional development for teachers, and they're directing and leading it. So I'm just adding 2 stars to Catherine's comment.
Those are great approaches. Absolutely. I can see where that would really benefit in a non-threatening such environment, whereas it's not Greta up there imparting the information you need the teachers to know, but they're working together and basically coming to those conclusions on their own, discovering.
And it builds collegiality. What a great, bonding experience too that you can have. Solving problems.
This is Diane. I would third what Greta and Catherine said. We just finished on Friday a lot of cross-district, actually course-alike, where they were actually using student work and the rubrics, and in a course-alike group about how they got to those scores. And they absolutely loved every minute together, and I think it was very, very helpful, especially for new teachers to the district who.
Oh, Diane, we lost you. Hold on just a second. I'm not sure what happened. Let's see. Diane, hold on. I'm trying to unmute you.
I look unmuted to me.
Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, I was just thirding what Greta and Catherine were saying about the power of teachers scoring together when we did that last Friday in course-alike groups, and teachers brought actual assessment samples, and we used the usual rubrics that we use across the district, and they thought it was extremely powerful, especially teachers new to the district who may or may not have any experience whatsoever with grading student performances on a rubric.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing those thoughts. That's really, really helpful just to hear what people are doing in their district on the ground to build the understanding of grading for proficiency. If anybody else would like to comment, we've got about 1 more minute. Not sure exactly what happened here with the mics and whatnot, but if you raise your hand or type your question in, we can get it just the last thing. One person asked, Michelle asked, how do you fund those kind of sessions where teachers are reviewing student work together? Is it voluntary, Diane, for your groups, or Greta?
With ours, last week was a district PD day, so I had them all day. So we had a variety of things, but we spent the morning in a couple of Corsa-like groups, so I had them then.
Okay. So you had a mandatory day, and that's one of the ways you chose to spend it. Okay.
All 80 of them together. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Irma, you wanted to comment?
Yes, hi Leslie. I work with 28 independent school districts in my county, and so I don't work with just necessarily individual teachers. That's a part of my work. But so my approach to standards-based grading was to invite teachers from across the county who were interested in the topic of standards-based grading, because I do have teachers, you know, in several of the districts that are trying to do something on their own, but they've been little islands with little communication with anyone outside of their own building. And so I put this team together, and we've been working on this now since last August. And so it's been a very good journey, because with 7 to 8 heads coming together and perspectives, we've been able to come up with an approach that we're going to roll out for the entire county. And we're going to do this in May and June. We've got a couple of dates that we're going to do 2 full-day workshops on standards-based grading in world languages only, obviously. And we're hoping to attract an administrator or administrators from each district, together with world language teachers who haven't had a chance to be involved and really think deeply about how this change can come about, how we can bring about this shift. So we are going to have really resources and some of the things you need to think about to move to this kind of paradigm shift. I don't have anything to report other than that we're working on it, and we're going to be delivering it in the next couple months. And hopefully next year maybe we'll know more and we'll see how it goes. But so far the team approach to developing these resources is working well.
Absolutely. And I think what I hear those wise people out there in language acquisition land say is that having our teachers go through the process is more important than the product they produce, because then they grow in their own knowledge. So it's so wonderful to hear. I know our time is up, but it's so wonderful to hear all of you have your comments and ideas, and that's what makes this session special. It's not about us talking, but we want to hear what you guys are doing and learn from each other. So thank you so much for adding your questions to our document. Thank you for doing that while we're talking and ahead of time. Thank you for asking questions and participating. Really appreciate you. We just want you to find one little nugget of information that you want to go and pick apart and build on. We're all moving forward. None of us are standing still. So find something that interests you that you want to explore, or an idea that you heard that you want to implement into your own district. Lisa, do you have any parting words for us before we go?
Well, I really appreciate the comments that came in at the end, and agree wholeheartedly with the ideas that were shared. And again, I do hope there are nuggets out there for us. It is a journey. It is a you called it the hot seat. It certainly didn't feel hot to me as entering such a nice group. But I think you will find that role, can be, very difficult and challenging. And so it's so great to have NADSFL and the support of progressive people to help support you in that journey. So keep that good learning community going.
I'm so excited to hear from people besides once a year, so this has been thrilling for me. I hope people are finding it useful. And don't forget, too, that the documents that we've been working from is going to be available for hopefully all time for you to be able to add to and to reference. So thank you to Leslie today for helping us get this second cafe, NADSFL Cafe, together, and a really heartfelt and warm thank you to Lisa Lilley for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, folks, and we hope to see you next time. We'll let you know via email when our next meeting will be for NADSFL Cafe number 3. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Unmuted.
And I also, this is Leslie, I also want to say thanks to Christy and Lisa for today. I'm sorry I had some sound issues. I can either talk or listen, but not both at the same time. But we will get this recording posted on the NADSFL website, and Google Docs will certainly stay up as well. So thanks to all.